movements. And we were able to do this quite well. And as we have discovered that now we can almost completely lock up, right? Suddenly the categories are being shifted around. So I don't think this is going to have, I mean, does this mean that, for instance, when we look at border security policies per se, does this mean that we will see walls disappear? No. Because walls are a policy that address a very specific issue. But does this mean that some individuals will never have to ask a visa and will be able to travel, let's say, to 170 countries without worrying? Yes. And the difference between the two situations is that you have walls for people who have burned their fingerprints and renounced all belonging to any nation because they think they can actually escape the system, and then they end up in camps where they renegotiate their rights from scratch. Like in Calais, right, where they use the Human Rights Charter, the Charter of Human Rights of the European Union, to basically enter the EU without knowing where they'll be able to settle. And in most cases, they are displaced across Europe because Europe doesn't have the policy tools to actually deal with them once they enter the EU, but can't send them back. So this is going to stay there. Was that bad?
No. You raised a lot of fascinating questions. I mean, towards the end, it seems to me very troubling.
Yes.
Not so much from the standpoint of the biometrics and all that, but from the extension to this realm of problems of economic inequality. That you're essentially saying, as I understand it at the end, that rich people are going to travel more easily. Borders are not going to exist in the same way as they will before of whatever national background, state background, and that is maybe inevitable in the future, that you're going to have a class of people who are international travelers. I mean, I have a global re-entry thing for the U.S., and I pay a little bit of money, and I travel frequently, and I can't completely avoid the border, but I go to a machine. I don't have to look at a human being. I don't have to get in a line. So I have a privilege because I pay a little more money. You know, is that the future?
Yeah, I think that's the future that will generalize, because the first step is to do it for one state, but then it's, in the European case, you're looking at 29 or 30. And then there are free trade agreements between, for instance, Canada, the US, and the European Union. And the next step is to allow all business people across all these different territories to actually just be completely free to set up business, to travel, to have access to, you know, basic services and so on and so forth. Why not? When you look at the EU policies and you look at specifically like the friendship, they have a partnership agreement with Canada, and you look at all the different facets of the partnership agreement and you look at free trade, it's only one of the cards. We're looking at, you know, 7 or 8 different domains of partnership. And free trade is only one, and security is also one. And I'll discuss border security of the EU this afternoon, but I think the border security of the EU will include, for instance, the sharing of databases on criminal activities. Well, certainly having these mega databases allows you to eliminate or allows you to rationalize your focus on very specific threats, because a large part of the population will be in the database, and so you don't have to worry about them so much. The disclosure of information is something that is going to have a huge impact in my mind on human rights and the way we understand, you know, privacy, because the technology allows us today to go very far. I mean, I work with people who work, you know, who are, I have colleagues in my research program who are working with the military. They're professors at military college, and they do research on these topics. And they are going very far. the ability, for instance, to collect information on one individual endlessly is, I mean, you've seen the work of the NSA and you've seen what Snowden said. It's possible. Does it mean that it's policy? I don't know, and I'm not going to go this far, but it is technologically possible. So if you can individualize the collection of information across the board and you have no limits to the number of cases, then you can individualize this 7 billion times and create new categories of people who can travel or not. And you can therefore focus on very specific criminal or terrorist activities much more easily. You know, algorithm, I'll take both your questions, but algorithm, for instance, on what website you're visiting. As soon as you pass a threshold, the focus can be on you. And generalized, not just the website. It can be phone, it can be everything, travel, everything. So it's possible. Yes?
My question was, with regards to you and other cars, especially ones where there's been a rise in I would say nationalists, but more like anti-immigration, where those groups like major blocs of the Republican Party in the U.S., also in Europe, the UK, IFP, and the National Front France. How do you think that would affect the current situation?
It depends what they want to do with the technology, but it's there, right? I don't know what these groups are going to do. I don't think, for instance, that I'm not convinced that I don't know exactly how to frame this, but some of those groups can use the technology as an oppressive system. Some of those groups can use this technology to basically control subcategories. So, you know, specific ethnic groups or specific immigrants. So if you had nationalist policies that would be, for instance, xenophobic or racist, you have the technology to implement them in new ways. But again, you know, it's a political decision, and it would be, in the case of the EU, because you talk about this, it would be a negotiation across the different EU states. The idea that they would secede, which is something the National Front has, you know, made in a way in its platform for France against Europe, or that the EU would secede, is very possible, but has huge cost. Like if the EU were to secede if the UK were to secede from the EU today, you should see that they may not be followed by a place like Scotland and Wales, and that as a very small country, Britain then, or even just England, would not have much influence on the international level, would have difficult access to the rest of Europe in terms of trade, and so on and so forth. The consequences would be huge. Now, I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well, but if these nationalist regimes or ideas or groups were to have influence across different EU states and were to want to secede and they could use the technology in their different regions in different manners, right? Some of which could be very oppressive. And at the same time, I don't know if they would really benefit from this on the long term. I mean, John Major, for instance, gave a talk, I think 3 days ago in Germany, where he said that the likeliness that the UK secede is actually just under 50% right now, and it's very serious, and that they need the United Kingdom needs the support of the EU to actually, you know, basically fight back the influence of, for instance, UKIP and all these and the different groups. Seems to be very real, but at the same time, he lists what in his views are the consequences for Britain. Further secession, no influence on the international scene, and he has, a long list. I had another. Yes, please. Yeah, that's it. So the question is, how do you think this is going to impact basically North-South relations and also rich-poor worldwide? Is that a good summary? So I'll tell you what my hypotheses are, but I have little evidence of it. I have some evidence, though there are some research programs that are looking in these directions. In terms of individuals, rich everywhere will benefit from, or can benefit, because they'll be part of the worldwide flows. And that is already written, right? I have colleagues who've collected data showing that even when you look at a Nexus card, when you look at a fast car, when you look at all these mechanisms, even when you look at passports, it is sociologically or socioeconomically marked. In other words, that the wealthiest you are, the more likely you are to have all these instruments to travel freely. And this will just increase because you're creating a new layer, which is the biometric layer, right? So you have biometric passports, but the day you don't have the passport anymore, the very rich will be the first one to benefit from this. Now, if we look at socioeconomic issues worldwide, I have also colleagues who work on borders and talk about borders as a mechanism to organize work and differentiation, socioeconomic differentiation. And that's one of the hypotheses that I think is very interesting, but also very scary. It's the idea that as the world is fragmenting, you have entire communities that are locked in, while the very rich are able to move more easily. And farther than that, when you look at the work, for instance, of this research center in Antwerp in the Netherlands, you have no evidence that for the first time in human history, you have both socioeconomic inequality within countries and across countries that are moving in polar opposite directions. Whereas in the past, socioeconomic inequality was always within countries. But the very rich across the world in the different countries were always about at the same level of wealth, right? Whereas now you have countries with very rich people who are actually only middle class elsewhere. And in some countries you have people who are worldwide very rich, basically, the top 2%, the top 1%, with every time scales of differentiations that are huge. And so I'm more worried about this because it means that we have a technology, a bounding technology, or a bordering technology that allows us to differentiate within territories, within states, because we can control mobility so effectively. So the Bordering Globalization research program that I have is looking at some of those issues.
Can I just follow up? I think often, if I'm not mistaken, you were asking less about individuals than about countries, and the capacity of poorer countries to adopt the technology and to be part of a worldwide regime of easier movement. So
No.
does that mean that you have not just individual inequality, but country?
Country inequality is the result of the biotechnology. Country inequality will come about because to implement these technology, you need multinational agreements. And those countries will not have access to those. They'll be excluded. It's already, in a way, present when it's so difficult for some countries to join some of the groups. I mean, let me just illustrate this. Turkey in Europe has been a candidate for, probably all of my adult life, the last 20 years. Mexico, US, Canada, the difficulty between Mexico and the US, Canada, I will discuss a little bit more this afternoon, where you also have some major misunderstandings and where it basically is, a non-recognition of peership, right? You are almost our peer for free trade, but you're not our peer for security, right? Whereas between the EU and Canada, and I put it two different categories, you already have discussions on security matters. The EU and Canada, the European Union and Canada, because then on security matters they think they can be peers.
We probably have reached the end of time, and it's time to thank Professor Brunet-Jailly for giving us such a stimulating opening.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions.
And just a reminder of the talk at 2 o'clock this afternoon on border security issues. So please tell your friends and neighbors. Look forward to seeing you here too.
Okay, super.
Oh, no, you're welcome.